G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome to a bit of a supplementary guide for the 7-day Beginner's Arc Witch Build project. This is not exactly one of the daily guides, but just an extra one I wanted to throw in. I've gotten a lot of questions about why we go for the Flask effect nodes here in exiting the Witch area instead of going through something like the spell damage. You know, that's 4 passive points there to get to here for 30% spell damage. Now, firstly, I don't think it's very point efficient. Like, that's, I don't know, it's like, what, 8% or 7.5% spell damage per passive? So it's not exceptionally good, I don't think. But, you know, more damage is always very enticing, so I can understand that question. Whereas the Flask effect nodes are kind of a bit less obvious in what actual benefit they offer for your character. Now, some people rightfully know how very strong these nodes are, but I think these are probably some of the most criminally underrated nodes in the game. These are exceptionally powerful, and they're actually a core component of this build in helping to deal with some of the weaknesses of the character, to like cover the weaknesses of the character, and to just enhance the character as well. So let's go over exactly what these are. There are 3 nodes here, 3 Flask effect nodes. Each gives 10% increase effect of Flask. So any sort of Flask effect can be multiplied by a total of 30%, so 1.3 essentially. So you can take any Flask effect and then multiply it by 1.3. I'll go over my different Flasks and the effects these had and just show them straight up how they work. So first up is, one of my favorites is the Granite Flask. Now this gives a base of 3,000 armor. 3,000 armor is pretty potent by itself, but generally with a Granite Flask, the best thing to roll is a Granite of Iron Skin. That gives you up to 100% increased armor during the Flask effect for that time as well. So essentially you get 4.8 seconds of the 3,000 armor, again doubled, so you can essentially double that amount. But it also increases your armor that your character has a base. Now, I talked about covering weaknesses of the character. One of the weaknesses of this character is, although we have things like Arctic Armor and Mind Over Matter and stuff like that, our base armor isn't all that high. I've only 500 at this point, which is 5% estimated physical damage reduction at level 82. Now, the Granite gives us essentially, you can imagine, 6,000 extra armor when we pop it. Now we have 500 here as well, so the Iron Skin effect doubles that as well, so bringing it up to 1,000. So we should end up with about 7,000 armor by using the Granite. However, when I use this, you'll see we actually go up over 10,000, bringing our physical damage mitigation to 4.9% for almost 5 seconds. That's incredibly potent and enough to completely mitigate a lot of the damage we're taking, especially when you then factor in things like the Enduring Cry Molten Shell setup I have going on, and the flat damage mitigation, which is over 120 physical damage mitigated from Arctic Armor. It becomes a very potent sort of trifecta of action going on there. Now the reason for this is that the Flask effect node multiplies the base armor, so we get 30% increase of 30% increase of the base 3,000 armor, and then 30% increase of the armor effect as well. So the 99% increased armor is also multiplied by 30%. So I end up getting about 9,000 armor from this just here. So that's pretty damn potent, as you can imagine. So basically it's the difference between 7,000 armor and 9,000 armor thanks to those nodes. 2,000 extra armor, and I use this Granite all the time in maps. I'm constantly using it. Like, I would say I'm probably using it like 50% of the time, I guess. It's pretty easy, especially when you've got that perpetual prefix, the one that gives you more charge recovery, to use the Granite all the time. And whenever there's physical damage happening, I'm popping this Granite. So that means I'm getting 2,000 extra armor-ish, and then it multiplies more depending on your gear as well. Just thanks to those 3 nodes. 2,000 extra armor from 3 passive nodes is incredibly effective. Now, that would be good if it was all it did, but they also do other things as well. So now let's take a look at the Topaz Flask. Now, one of the things that I was trying to think about with this character was how do we deal with Reflect, and this is a lightning damage is pretty spiky, and when you hit like a double reflect pack or a LE reflect pack, you can, if you hit the top end, you're doing like 2,500 lightning damage, you can reflect a lot of that back to yourself and deal a lot of damage really quickly, especially when it's a large group and you're chaining and the mobs are shock stacked and all that stuff happens, and you can kill yourself very quickly with Reflect. Now we counter that a bit with things like Purity of Lightning and stuff, but the Topaz Flask is very handy to run. What a Topaz Flask does by base is gives you 50% extra lightning resistance, which doesn't really have much impact because you're generally overcapped, but at poor gearing levels like my current stat, state, if you have something like elemental weakness, you could be undercapped. So at least this takes it over, and the 30% does increase that as well. So we are getting over 50% lightning resist. And then it also increases your maximum lightning resist by 10%. Now, thanks to that flask effect node, we get an extra 3%. Now, 3% maximum lightning resist does not sound like a lot, but if you guys are familiar with the way max resists work, even 1% increase is a big deal. If you go from 90% mitigation, let's imagine you have 90% lightning resist. If you go from 90% to 91%, that's a 10% decrease in the amount of damage you're taking. If you go from 90 to 95, that's a 50% decrease in the amount of damage you're taking. So it's actually very potent. Keep in mind that our characters are nearly always at 75% resistances, and you still take a lot of damage from elemental, right? When you start getting that closer and closer to 100%, it gets more and more and more powerful. So that 3% is very potent. So you can see that this is with my normal setup without Cephals. Cephals gives us another 4%, but just popping a Topaz here takes us to 96% lightning resistance. Now with Cephals frame, this one just here, I'll pop it again, and we go up to 100%. We take no lightning damage whatsoever. So that means no reflect, but also it means when we're fighting bosses like Piety that use lightning storms and stuff like that, we take 0 damage whatsoever. So without those flask effect nodes, we would take still 3% of that total damage, which can still actually hit quite hard, though admittedly 97% mitigation is still quite good. But it is an extra effect, and it means even without Cephals, we are pretty much immune to reflect and stuff like that. Our life regen essentially covers it. Now, next up, here's another one that I really like. I've started using this Atzuri Promise Amethyst Flask just here. Now, this does two things for this character. Again, gain 15% of elemental damage as extra chaos damage during effect. So, and then 10% of chaos damage is leached back as life. So essentially, it converts 15% of the elemental damage to chaos, and then 10% of that damage is calculated back as life. Now, essentially, this means we can calculate our average damage, which I think is something like 800 on this. I can't remember the math, but you can basically just add it up and then divide it by 2. I'm terrible at looking at math by sight like that. Anyway, so I ended up, it's about like 50 life per hit whenever we cast Arc, so it works alright. But what happens with the 30% increase? You guessed it, it also increases both of these things. So we get 13% of chaos damage leached as life during Flask effect, giving us more life leech. And then the 15% of elemental damage, I think I have mathed it out to be, it's about 19.5% or something like that. So almost 20% of elemental damage as extra chaos. So if we round that up slightly, just cheating a little bit, we get about an extra 5% chaos damage from this. So instead of getting 15% extra damage, we get 20% extra damage, basically. So when I pop this, I go from 4.6k DPS to 5.5k DPS. And this is another flask, just like the Granite Flask, that I will chain as much as possible. It lasts a bit over 4 seconds at full quality. So you can chain that quite a lot. And then the extra life leech from that is also quite potent at keeping ourselves alive. I'll actually go and demonstrate the life leech for you guys as well, just to sort of show how quickly you can heal yourself with it. Alright, so here I am in docks about half-life. These guys are going to kill themselves, so I better be quick. And then I'll pop the flask and then attack, and you'll see that my life jumps up pretty quickly. It's a shame because the guys actually died a little bit too quickly. But you can see how quickly my life is able to jump up just from that life leech there, and you can heal yourself up pretty quickly from that. Now, the combined effect of all of this is just here, that these 3 flask effect nodes, so these 3 passive points, increase our physical mitigation from the Granite Flask by 30%, so that's happening. It increases our leech by an extra 3% from the chaos, increases our DPS by an extra 5%, and increases our maximum lightning resist by 3%, and the extra resistance we get from that as well. All of these things are happening, and pretty much at once and very frequently throughout the maps. So for 3 passive points, that's a lot of value. That's a lot of value. I really, really, really like these nodes, in case you guys couldn't quite tell. And hopefully that explains exactly why I do go about and getting them. And then, in case that wasn't all enough for you guys, just if I needed a bit of an extra to seal the deal, It also increases the amount healed by Flasks as well. Now I talked about in a previous video how potent the sapping was. It's 1300 life over 3 seconds. Well, you guessed it, the Flask effect node also increases the healing that gives you by an extra 30%. So also our healing Flasks are affected by it. So we get the healing, we get the lightning resist, we get the damage, we get the leech, we get the armor, and then if you're using quicksilvers earlier on, you get faster run speed even. It's pretty good stuff. So, anyway, if you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments below. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.